I haven't done a review like this in a while. It's been pretty much manga related, so this is actually gonna be fun. Hello everyone, my name is Daidarius, and welcome to the review of WandaVision. I'm actually kind of cozy right now. I have my hands in the pockets of this shirt, so this is gonna be a very, very laid back review. So, WandaVision is the first series / television show for the MCU. If you don't count, Agents of S.w.o.r.d. or Daredevil or Jessica Jones or Luke Cage or Iron Fist or The Punisher or The Defenders. But if you don't count those, this is the first TV show for MCU. Now, in all seriousness, I do really feel like this is the first proper television show for the MCU in that it ties into this whole cinematic universe a lot better than the other shows did. Now, that doesn't mean that the other shows are bad on that part, but this feels more connected. And I think the other shows that Disney is going to do on Disney Plus is going to feel the same. It's going to feel much more connected to the movies than the former shows did. Now, what is the story in WandaVision? Well, I can't tell you that much because it will spoil the show for you, and trust me, this is one of the shows that you don't want spoiled. But to summarize it, it will be that Wanda and Vision, which, if you remember, Vision got killed by Thanos when he plucked that Infinity Stone right out of his forehead. They wake up in this town called Westview, and they are married. They don't know how they got there, and for some reason everything is a sitcom. Then slowly throughout the episodes, where we jump from one age period, which I think it starts in the 50s, to the next one decade at a time. So the next episode is in the 60s, the 70s, so on and so forth. Some cracks start to show in this alternative reality that they are in, and we're also starting to see who's actually behind this whole weird ordeal while trying to figure out why it happened in the first place. Now, there's of course a lot more happening to this show, but basically it is divided into two sections. This is four fingers. It's divided into two sections. One is the sitcom where we just follow Vision and Wanda's weird life in this sitcom world throughout the decades, and the other is in the outside world where not S.w.o.r.d, because technically S.w.o.r.d doesn't really exist anymore, but S.w.o.r.d is trying to figure out what's happening and how can they fix it. There's a lot more going on with the story in here, but again, I don't want to spoil it because trust me, the story is actually one of the most interesting aspects of this show. So let me just go to what I liked about this show. First of all, the premise. I do love the premise because it is so different from what we have seen from the MCU up until now. The MCU does things extremely safe. They might change that moving into phase 4, but for the most part from phase 1 through phase 3, they have done things extremely safe. So it is nice to see them break out and do something different, taking some chances with their project here. Also, the acting here is magnificent because since this is extremely inspired by the sitcoms throughout the decades, Wanda and Vision acts as if they were actors in sitcoms for those periods. So the way they act and tell the story and all that in the 50s era of this show will match what sitcoms from the 50s are and how they will present effects, music, commercials, laugh beats, all of that. It is extremely well represented in here, and the same goes for the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and you can kind of go and guess what's inspired the different eras. For example, when you get to the 90s / the early noughts, it's obviously Malcolm in the Middle there, and so on throughout the decades. It is extremely well done. I do like that they update the visual effects and the costumes for especially Vision and also Wanda's powers when you move through the decades. So it kind of represents what a TV show is able to do with their budgets to present an effect. And I do applaud it for committing that hard to this whole concept of, soap operas and comedic shows and stuff. Another thing that this show does extremely well is planting the mystery to you. And by that I mean at the end of the first or second episode? I can't remember. It's been a long time. I saw this show week to week, so it's been a while. But I think it's the end of the second episode. They start to hint at the mystery. I mean, they do that beforehand, but especially at the end, you see that something is not right with this sitcom world that they live in. And throughout the episodes, they do extremely well with the pacing of the breadcrumbs they were trying to lay to you as the audience of what the hell is actually going on in here. I also enjoy how they mixed in especially color with the first two episodes, which takes place in the 5th and the 6th, because there were no color TV there, but also how they play with the aspect ratio. It just conveys the time period perfectly, but also tells you, the audience, where you are in the world, being that in this alternative dimension or in the quote-unquote real world. And just the whole mystery surrounding all of that is extremely well done. I don't want to spoil anything, but I think it's well done, but there are some issues. I'm gonna get to that later. Fuck. The humor in here is good, but not when we're talking sitcom laughs. So there's a lot of laugh tracks in here because, again, it is emulating a sitcom, and those jokes don't work that well. However, the part that's not focused on the sitcom jokes, but more just genuine humor, actually works well and made me laugh on multiple occasions. And especially when you move away from the canned laughter that's the sitcom used up until the 80s, on even 90s, and then move into the modern world where we don't use canned laughter, it actually works more. And also when we are kind of moving outside the sitcom perspective, it's hard to explain, but some of the humor lands, some of the humor doesn't. And again, it's just how they stick to emulating that time period's comedic shows and sitcoms. So not everything will work in present day as they would back then. But anywho, sometimes this show is funny, but other times it's not that funny. But the relationships in here are genuine, especially the relationship between Wanda and Vision. I do more so believe in now than I did in the movies, because in the movies there wasn't enough screen time for it. It was kind of that they went from, hey, you look interesting, to I love you with all my heart between Civil War and Infinity War. There was a big time jump. There was a 2-year time jump there, and a lot of stuff had happened, but for us, the audience, suddenly we had to care about these two's relationship, but there wasn't enough time given for that to go into fruition. So this show kind of expands that part of their relationship, and it works well. Now, I could go on and on about this show, but again, I don't want to spoil too much of it. What I will say is that of all of the MCU series that we have that kind of leans into existing in the same world, this is what I think people wanted the Agents of S.w.o.r.d. to be. And by that I mean it feels extremely well integrated into the MCU world. Not only do you have actual Avengers in here, but it's also very strongly connected to Endgame, because this show takes place almost immediately after Endgame. I think it's only a couple of weeks at max that this takes place afterwards. And you do feel the effects of Infinity War and Endgame in here. And I do appreciate it. It also fleshes out Wanda's character a lot, which works well, again, since her and Vision hasn't been at the forefront of the movies, considering they're more side characters. They're more working around in the background. Whereas here we actually get to know them, not only, the strengths and the weaknesses and flaws and all that, but also the backstories, where they come from and why they act the way they act. So yeah, characterization. But anyway, I'm gonna stop trying to praise this show, because again, I want to keep this concise, and it's kind of hard to talk about it without spoiling it. So stuff I didn't appreciate about the show, one of it is the humor. Again, some of the humor lands, some of it doesn't, but a lot of the sitcom humor, since we have moved away from the 60s, 70s and all that, it doesn't land as well. And since this is still an emulation, you can kind of feel that it wasn't the sitcom comedic writers that was on here, it was just, MCU writers. So it doesn't really work well. They know what works for them, and that is the modern MCU humor, but in here it doesn't really have time to shine. And when they try to actually force it on you in all those scenes with swords, it kind of feel forced, like they were sitting on so many jokes that they couldn't put into the sitcom, so they just forced them at you at once, and it doesn't flow that well. That mixed in with all the mysteries in here. Now, I'm not going to spoil the mysteries, but all the mysteries that they allude to kind of amounts to almost nothing, which is a bummer. They kind of allude to something and then they retcon it, but then they retcon it again, and it just cheapens the whole impact of what this show's trying to do. It, of course, tries to explain Wanda and Vision and their relationship and backstory and flesh out their character, yes, but there is also a mystery in here that they don't lean enough into, and they're also trying to ruin the ending with not acknowledging the horrible things that happened in this show. Again, I'm not going to spoil it, but a lot of horrible things happen in here, and the responsible person doesn't really get punished for it. So I would appreciate it if they lean more into not only the mystery, but also where they were going with all the characters, and also if they could have kind of dialed back the cartoonish villain in here, because just the whole setup in and of itself is enough for the villains, but they just went overboard to make them cartoony, and that is a bummer. That mixed in with the finale, which is, it is a safe MCU finale. You're gonna get some CGI fights, you're gonna get some bombastic shit in here, but it wasn't really what the show was going for. It was going in a different direction. Now, the whole end fight that involves Vision was excellent, but it was stuff like that we wanted to see more of, which we unfortunately didn't get. Also, at the end, it doesn't really seem like this show accomplishes that much, except of fleshing out Wanda and kinda nudging her in the direction I'm thinking Phase 4 and or Phase 5 is gonna lead with her. But besides that, it doesn't really impact the whole MCU that much. Which again makes you think, then what was the point? If you only wanted to set up Wanda's story more, you could have done so easily in another movie or just in a few episodes. But this whole thing, it was kind of like it was an awesome idea, but it didn't really know where to go with it, or at least commit to those changes, which again bumps this whole show down. It's almost like you have built up this great show, and then at the finish line, you kind of drop the balls. Now, where have we heard that before? It is not that bad, but it is still a mild version of that. So what you're gonna get with WandaVision is that you're gonna get a very interesting and different take on what the MCU can do. You're gonna get a crash course from the 50s and up until modern day on how sitcoms are. You're gonna get some interesting mysteries. You're gonna get some extremely great acting, especially in some of the scenes. Paul Bettany and Elizabeth Olsen are just nailing it. You're also gonna get some actually great effects, considering it is a TV show. But on the other hand, the show doesn't really commit to what it wants to do. The mysteries are kind of dropped for jokes, and or they didn't want to commit more to them, and at the end it's going to fall back into the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe formula, which is a bummer considering it started out that strong. So I will say that WandaVision is worth watching in cinema, entertainment guaranteed. I have a feeling that I actually need to update my ratings when I'm talking about a TV show, since you don't watch those in cinema. Who knows? But anywho, WandaVision, have you seen it? What did you think about it? And are you stoked that Phase 4 and Phase 5 and maybe even Phase 6 are actually gonna incorporate these TV shows into them, unlike Agents of S.w.o.r.d. and the whole Netflix series, where they was just taking part of it, but they weren't necessary for the phase? This one are you stoked about that? Because this actually sets up Doctor Strange's Multiverse of Madness and Captain America 2, as well as the Invaders series, which is coming later this year, I think. So it sets up a lot of things, and apparently if you want to get the MCU experience from now on, you also need to watch TV shows. Personally, I'm not a big fan of that. I don't mind them expanding the universe with TV series, but I don't want it so if you want to understand what's going on in the movies, you also have to watch the TV shows. That I don't want, but we'll see. This is only the beginning. WandaVision is just the beginning of Phase 4, so I can't really argue if it's a bad thing yet, but we will see. So did you like it? And also, how do you think it ranks against the other MCU, I should probably use quotation marks now, the other MCU series? I still think it is fine. I think it's good, but if you're going with MCU series, Daredevil is the best. And then actually Marvel's Agents of S.w.o.r.d, but that's only because it is diverging itself and just doing its own thing at the end, and I kind of enjoyed it for what it was. But whatever you think, come Comment below me your thoughts. And as always, until I see you next video, remember to stay awesome. Bye. Jesus Christ, this hair. It's only gonna get worse until they open up, so get used to it.